Hey there, Jonathan Golko here. Welcome back to the sound booth at Studio 1405. Today, we continue our virtual journey and take one step deeper into the world of music production. Let's talk about the editing process. There are definitely musicians out there who can rock the one-take wonder status. That is, hit record, they play their part, no changes or retakes are necessary. But in the creation process, being able to edit takes or adjust MIDI information is a key tool in shaping the story you're looking to tell with your music. This is just like how a film director can use different camera angles and multiple takes of an actor's performance to produce the closest image to what the director has in their head. Our job as music editors will be exactly the same. That is to say, that in the event that we are working with 3 takes of the same notes being played at the same time, subtle differences in articulation and dynamics, phrasing, and even rhythmic accuracy can tell a drastically different story depending on which takes are selected. At this point in the process, we're also going to be introducing a method that is key to prepping a recording for the mixing stage. This method is called gain staging. Gain staging is adjusting the raw audio volume of a recording or a MIDI instrument and setting its volume level so that we have enough headroom for adding effects while also avoiding clipping or distorting that audio. Now, before we begin editing the audio to our lead melody, let's first take a look at our piano part and make some adjustments to the MIDI information that dictates what that piano synth will be playing. So we're back into Pro Tools. Here we have on the right the edit window and on the left the mix window. Let's take a look at the mix window. Let's begin by a technique called gain staging. Gain staging is setting the audio volume at -10 dB within our volume readers so that the instruments will blend very well together within the digital space while giving us enough headroom to be able to add more volume in terms of effects later down the line when we get into mixing and mastering. So the first step to this is to go here to the bass clarinet channel under Inserts, Plugin, Other, Trim. This is a volume reader. We see the gain here, and we can adjust that moving forward or moving backwards. Hold Option and click to return to homeostasis at 0. We're going to be aiming for this -10 sweet spot. If we go over a little bit, it's going to be okay, but we don't want to get to the point of distorting where we're clipping our audio. We won't be able to fix that. But we want to get most of the transients, that means most of the sound, to be hitting at this -10 as an average sweet spot. That would give us enough headroom to be able to add more effects down the line when we get into mixing and mastering. So if we go to the piano, we're going to do the same thing. We'll go to, in this case, multi-mono plugin, down to Other, Trim. A shortcut you can do is to literally hold Option and click and drag from one to the other. That'll copy and paste the plugin, in this case, for the trim. So now we want to look at both of these piano plugins. This is where we're going to begin. So hold Shift and hit Mini Grand. This opens the synthesizer. Hold Shift and click Trim. We've now opened both plugins simultaneously, so this way we don't have to toggle back and forth. We can look at both of them at the same time. So let's make sure that we're getting sound from our MIDI keyboard into the computer by going to Track, Record, Enable. We're going to turn that on and give the piano a play. So there's 2 ways that we can approach the piano sound. We're going to use some of the master volume on the synthesizer here, as well as the trim if we need to give it a little additional boost. But let's take a look at our piano part that we made in our last episode. Command plus to get into the edit window. We're going to double click to make that full screen. So here you see we've got our entire piano accompaniment for the entire duration of the song. So by holding Option and scrolling up, we can zoom in. Scrolling down to zoom out. Now, another way to get into the piano roll here is to double-click this region. Double-clicking gets us into the piano roll. Same deal, hold Option and scroll down to zoom out. So here we're looking at all of the MIDI information as it corresponds to the piano roll. And we also have down here the velocity. Velocity shows the attack, the articulation of each individual note within the MIDI information. So we can see here in the entire song form that we have the loudest transients, the loudest notes happening right here in the beginning. We'll click the marker just before that. We've got our pre-roll set, so we'll get 4 beats leading into that moment. We're going to keep an eye on the trim reader looking for this -10, but we'll make some adjustments to the master volume of this synthesizer if we're falling short of -10. Let's take a listen. Looks like we're hitting at about -16 there for that loudest transient point. So let's go ahead and turn this volume up here on the master. Watch where this is going to hit as we increase the volume here. Same part. Getting closer. Let's listen one more time. We're getting really close. There it is. So we got our -10. And we'll notice that what we did was increase this to 10.5 dB, 10.5 decibels. We came from 4.5. So we've increased this by 6 decibels. That reflection happens here when we began at -16 decibels, and if you add +6 to this -16, we end at -10. So there's a mathematics to the decibels that allow us to both read as well as predict where we're going to be aiming for when we're looking for that target decibel level. When we're looking at -10 as just a flat field, this is kind of the equivalent of giving each instrument the same starting line, or at least the same even ground, rather than kind of competing against each other on a slope. If we are having a piano that's at -6 dB while a bass clarinet is happening at -12, the balance isn't quite sitting. If we start everything at -10, this gives us a much better position to be able to adjust volumes, especially as we're adding more instruments. So again, we started at -16, but by adding +6 dB decibels on the synth, we've increased the volume's perceived loudness to -10. And now the piano volume's in a much better position. Let's go ahead and close those. Let's take a look at one of our bass lines. Let's begin here in measure 7. So when you click into the piano roll, when you hold Option and you're zooming in and out, you're going to be zooming in and out of that exact moment where the marker is placed. That's important, so you want to be able to keep track of where you're at. So we're zooming into measure 7. Now, if we're looking at some of these bass tones, there's several ways that we could get these bass parts to be hitting within the time code. First off, if we were to highlight this section and then go Option 0 on the Mac keyboard, this opens Event Operations. This is going to give us the ability to quantize our MIDI information so that it hits directly in the time code. Now, we can get this to the grid in terms of half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes. It's complex as 64th notes. We can do triplets. They even have a few groove simulators to be able to give you more of a realistic feel within your quantization. In this example, just to see what happens, we're going to keep this at 100%. We could randomize it so it's not a perfect quantization, but again, in this example, let's see what happens if it's a 100% quantized. We ought to see all of this information snap right to the time code. Hit apply. We can see that it's perfectly in line now. Now this is going to be a more robotic feel. If we were to take this entire song and quantize it directly to the bar, it'd be very static and very block chord, but that's not how humans play. So we want to make sure that we keep the human feel, especially in something that's classical like this. So Command-Z, we're going to set those back to the way they were. Now, if we wanted to adjust the attack, which is the beginning when the note hits, we could do that manually too by highlighting and dragging forward. Let's say we just want to adjust the front end. Using the multi-tool here, we're going to drag the beginning forward, and we can drop that right at the line. We're keeping this human imperfect feel there, but we're going to be able to make this sit a little closer in the time code. We can also make adjustments to the back end the same way. In this case, we're using the sustain pedal, so we're not going to have to worry about that because the sustain pedal is going to cut off the note when it's the right time. Let's take a look at another editing tool that we can use. Let's go here to measure 27. Let's close that. Measure 27. Right here we have a C sharp minor chord. Let's say we wanted to redo this one chord, but we wanted to keep everything around it. Let's go ahead and delete this. Down here we have MIDI merge. MIDI merge gives us the ability to punch into the MIDI information without losing all of the music that happens before and after it. We're literally just going to be punching in this one chord. You can, of course, do entire phrases. You can absolutely do that. For this example, let's keep it short. We're just going to show how we can punch in this one chord. So we've got our pre-roll going. That'll give us 4 counts before the recording begins. Now remember our metronome here. We hit 7 on the keyboard and we can toggle back and forth between that. Blue means it's on. Let's keep that on just to help our timing here. So we're going to start in measure 26 of beat 4. We're going to punch in this 1 C sharp minor chord. But let's make sure that we got the piano armed. So let's switch by Command plus back to our edit window. We're going to arm the piano. Let's give it a play, make sure it's working. Again, we're doing a C sharp minor chord with an E in the bottom. We see that we're already here at where we want to be, but we don't want to double click on the region or else we're going to get the entire part. We want to get just this part that we have selected. So what we're going to do is hold Control and hit plus. That takes us directly into the piano roll at the moment that we have selected. In this case, between beats 3 and 4 of measure 26. We've got pre-roll on, we've got our metronome on. Let's go ahead and record this 1 chord punch in, hitting 3 to record. Now, I felt like I hit that a little aggressively. Let's go ahead and lower the intensity by highlighting that chord again, going down to the velocity, and just clicking and dragging down. And you're going to hear this get quieter and a little bit more gentle on the attack. Let's give that a listen. Much better. Command W to get out of this window. All right, now that we got the piano part happening, let's switch to our live instrument. Let's bring the bass clarinet in now. We're going to plug the microphone into our interface using an XLR cable. Now here in the studio, we also want to turn down the monitor speakers. So we're going to go down here right towards monitors and we're going to just go ahead and drop that, turn that off completely. This way we can just play through the microphone without having any sound coming back, doubling through the speakers. We're going to be in headphones from this point on. All right, now we're ready to get the bass clarinet in the game. But there's something I want to do first before we even kick this off. So in full transparency, this is a plastic clarinet. It's a beginner model. So sometimes we don't have access to professional quality equipment. And sometimes we have to be creative about what we can do within the program to help EQ and mix our way through some of these challenges. So let's take a look at our bass clarinet channel. We're going to go here to Plugin, EQ, and we're going to use a stock plugin that comes with the Pro Tools program. Let's use the EQ3 7-band. So I've been working with this clarinet for a few weeks now, and I'm starting to find some of the ways to be able to warm up the tone and reduce some of this harshness. There's this thing about this instrument that's driving me nuts, and it's got this shrill, piercing, harsh high end. It's more nasally. So we can actually work with this EQ to help reduce some of that harshness that's coming from this upper frequency range. If we take a look at this infographic from Musician on a Mission, this is a wonderful resource that you can find on YouTube, and they do much more deeper dives into some of the subjects that we're covering here in this series. So if we take a look at this is the frequency spectrum, and you'll notice that that corresponds to what we have here in the EQ. So when we're looking at this, going from left to right, we're looking at the bass end of frequency going towards the high end of frequency. And depending on where your volumes are sitting, here under 0 decibels or above 0 decibels, you get different qualities of color in the sound. This is also called the sonic spectrum. So what we're getting is piercing. We're getting a harshness and a nasally quality coming from a plastic clarinet, where a professional wooden quality clarinet actually has a much warmer sound that is much more brilliant and more characteristic. This instrument, we're dealing with a little bit too much of this area, the harshness, the piercing. Right in the middle, we find ourselves around 2 kilohertz, maybe even 3. So right away, I know that I'm going to want to take a dip at that frequency, lowering down 6 decibels on 2 kilohertz. Now, we can cover a wider band by clicking and dragging up, or reduce it by dragging down. This here will also control the width of this filter, which is referred to as Q. So on this clarinet, I know that somewhere between this 2 and 3K, even up towards 5, we're going to warm up the sound, not by making a boost at the low end, but by reducing the harshness of the high end. I'm going to put a wider Q, a wider filter on this, so that our harshness is being warmed up at a greater distance in frequency range. And this is going to be helpful because depending on what instrument or voice you're working with, in the mix, you're going to want to be able to control where the brilliance is actually coming through or if it's actually too much, and we want to be able to reduce it. So let's go ahead and go to Track, Record, Enable. We've got the microphone on, and you can see that we're already getting a level just from speaking. Now, I'm going to be playing a test note, and let's see if we can get up towards this -10. Let's go back to Inserts, hold Shift, and get that trim tool open. We'll look at both of these together because what you'll see here in our volume reader is another one right here. Again, always trying to get close to this -10 as an average. So when we're playing, if we're not hitting at this volume, we can also make some adjustments here before even getting to its actual volume channel. So let's see if we can get this trim as well as the EQ hitting at 10. Looks like we can add a little more. We can adjust this on the interface by going to our first channel, giving this a little bit of a boost. So this is going to be a good start for getting us into our recording. We've warmed up the sound a little bit by using reductive EQ or subtractive EQ to lower the harshness out of the natural qualities of the instrument, which will give us a little bit more of a realistic warmth to it, and it'll be much more pleasant to listen to. So back here in our edit window, holding Option, scroll up to zoom in. Hold Shift and scroll down to move to the right, and scroll up to move to the left. We're focusing on measure 6, which is the entrance for the bass clarinet. Now we want the recording to begin before measure 6 because we have some pickup notes to play leading into 6. So we're going to begin at the downbeat of measure 5. That's beat 1. We go down to the pre-roll. We've got it selected for a bar. That'll give us 4 clicks coming in from measure 4. Recording begins in measure 5, and that gives us a few beats before our entrance coming in at measure 6. And this is also Moonlight Sonata. Now that we've got the bass clarinet recorded, let's go into the edit window and take a listen to a few takes and edit together our best performance. So I've isolated this moment here in the end. Now I've already gotten the whole thing tracked, and if we go down to this arrow here, right next to the right of the bass clarinet channel, we're going to hold Control, Command, and click. You'll see the drop-down menu. So I've taken 3 takes here and I've labeled them here on the side, which you can do by selecting Rename, or you can do that here on each track as well by double-clicking and changing the name. So I'm focusing on this moment here, measures 64 and 65, as an example for what we can do listening to multiple takes and editing together a part within the edit window. So we're looking at take 3, 2, and 1. What this technique is called is compositing. We're going to composite or comp together a single take using moments from several other takes. Let's take a listen by soloing the bass clarinet. So we just listened to that part, and we're going to listen to the nuances of this 2-bar phrase. So we're going to go here to solo, bass clarinet. We're going to solo the effects, the reverb, and the submix. Remember that each channel goes one into the other. If we solo just the bass clarinet channel, it's not going to play through the rest of them. We need all the channels selected. Let's go ahead and turn the click off down there. We've shut off the pre-roll. We're going to punch right into here. We're going to take a listen to this and decide which parts of this we like the most and where we might want to fill in with other takes. Now there's one more thing to select once we've selected all of these channels, and that's going to be our takes. So in this sub-playlist here, we want to make sure that we solo this comp lane, in this case, take 3, so that within the bass clarinet channel, take 3 is going to be played. Let's take a listen and see where this hits. Here's take 2. Okay, so right here we hear a noise artifact. That's a sound that doesn't belong within the clean recording. Listen again. So we're not going to want to use that moment, but this stuff that happens afterwards is sounding nice. I like the emotion that we're getting out of this little passage here, and as you can see in the sound wave, it starts a bit louder and then it gets softer. Now if we wanted to see this at a better view, you can hold Option and Shift on the keyboard, scroll up, and you'll notice that the sound wave gets smaller. If you scroll down, it gets larger. So here we can see a little bit clearer where we're at. You see we get a little bit of a crescendo and then a decrescendo, so we're getting a lot more dynamic motion here. Let's say I want to keep this clip. So I'm going to go here to the arrow and click. You'll notice that it shot that right to the top line where the rest of our part is. Let's go back to this moment and just listen here. We're going to shut off the loop by right-clicking and turning that off. This will just play the one moment without looping it over and over. So let's make sure we got take 3 soloed. We're listening to just this moment. And then let's now listen to this one here from take 1. Take 3. This has a nice growth to it, so let's go ahead and keep that, and we're going to let it bleed into take 2 a little bit. So I pushed that up by hitting the arrow here. Now, if I turn this off, you'll see that we have a little bit of a gap here. And we can adjust that by pulling this over so the 2 regions overlap, or we can give them a little bit of space. In the case that we give them space, we want to add a crossfade. In the top corner, you'll see this square. If you click and drag, it's going to put a crossfade on it. That means it's going to fade out of the region. So we could do that in this case and add a little bit of a fade out, fade in from our region to region. Or if we wanted to just blend them right into each other, we could have the regions overlap, and then right at the bottom, you'll see the square for a crossfade. This is going to fade both parts into each other depending on the duration of this crossfade's length. So in this case, we want a nice small one so that we're literally only smoothing together where that cut was made. This helps reduce artifacts. That's clicks and pops that might occur going from region to region within the Pro Tools software. So we want to make sure we get a nice crossfade happening when we do this region to region bleeding into each other. It doesn't have to be a big one, just enough for a little smoothing. So now let's take a look at this one here. These 2 parts are going right into each other note to note. This would be an excellent place to put a crossfade so that the 2 notes go seamlessly into each other without being cut off from one recording to another. So I'm going to add a little bit of a crossfade here to smooth out the transition from note to note. Here's what this one sounds like. Here it is again. And to complete our phrase, let's take a listen one more time to take 1. There's a little bit of a fast vibrato that I don't particularly like for this moment, so I definitely don't want to use that. Let's listen to take 2. Here's take 3. That's got a little more of a gentle approach. Let's see how that sounds. Cutting that into our track. We're going to add, again, another crossfade. So if you click the region, hold Option and zoom in, that's scrolling up, we'll go right into the moment of the beginning of that region. So I'm going to go ahead and clean that up just a little bit, add the smallest of crossfades so that we go transitioning very smoothly and quickly from note to note. Let's take a listen to this. We shut this off so we're just hearing the bass clarinet channel. Nice. We'll do the same thing here. Click, Option, it's going to zoom into the beginning of that, and we're going to add a little bit of a crossfade. Now, once you've done all your editing, we can consolidate the track into one waveform, and here's how to do it. So here's a technique I like to do just to make sure that we're saving our work as we go. So we've made some changes to what was called Final, and what we want to do is if we click here using the multi-tool, we're going to click, drag, and highlight all of these. Down at the bottom of the region gives us the hand tool. Click and pull down on the drop down. You'll notice that right underneath it, there's going to be a little spot there that makes a 4th layer in the drop down. So now we've freed up our top instrument channel. What I like to do is highlight the entire region by clicking at the end, holding Shift, and clicking to the beginning. We've now got the entire form. By holding Option on the Mac keyboard, click and drag that back up to the top. We've now made a duplicate of what we've just edited. Hold Shift Option, and hit 3 on the Mac keyboard. This renders all of the edit into one waveform that we can then adjust in terms of its decibels. And if we needed to make any changes in the gain staging at this point, we could simply adjust that here within the waveform to give it a boost or a cut. Hold Option and click that lever to revert back to 0. To rename, double-click on the region. And you can name this whatever you like. In this case, let's go ahead and name it Bass Clarinet Super Ultra Final Forever. Enter. If we want to close out these other ones, we're just going to go back to the drop-down, hold Control and Command, click, and they are now out of the way. As just a final note, for the beginning and ends of these, let's go ahead and bring this in towards the middle. We're going to add a slight crossfade, zooming out. Let's go to the back end, click the marker to get us set. We're going to zoom into that moment. Go ahead and click. I'm going to cut that off and add a little bit of a fade out right at the end so that our region has a nice clean ending without any sound artifacts. Finally, to unsolo these instruments, hold Option and click on this S. We now have all of our channels active again. Command plus to get into the mix window. We've got one more thing to cover in this episode that's going to set us up for the next episode's mixing session. So if we go here to the master, inserts, multi-channel plugin, go down to sound field, we're looking at the VU meter. The VU meter gives us the totality of the recording. This is going to be every instrument, every effect. It's all going through this one plugin. Nothing's really happening in terms of volume. This thing is only reading the volume level. It's not actually affecting it. So what we want to do is be aiming between -10 and -1. If we're clipping or going over, this is going to make it much more difficult in the mixing and mastering stage to be able to dial that back. Once you've distorted your audio, there's no recovering from it. We want to stay on the softer side. So we're going to play the recording here with both the bass clarinet and the piano playing together. We're going to make some adjustments here on the piano's volume, the bass clarinet's volume, and the submix to get this hitting between -10 and -1 on the VU meter. You'll also notice that by bringing the piano down, the volume of the bass clarinet perceivably increased. We saw this happen in the EQ on that bass clarinet when we brought it down 2 kilohertz. By reducing the harshness, it actually added a little bit of warmth by removing the frequencies that were getting in the way. Similarly, when we're looking at the volume of the piano to the bass clarinet, by bringing the piano down, we've actually raised the perceived volume of the bass clarinet by having the piano sit underneath it, rather than making the entire track loud by making the bass clarinet louder. Even within that context, we still brought down our submix down about -3 or -4 dB, which means that the entire recording is going to sit more comfortably within this sweet spot. All right, let's listen one final time to the piano and the bass clarinet, keeping an eye on that submix and watching the VU meter to make sure that our sound is sitting between -10 and -1. Okay, that's it for now. Next time, we're going to step away from the microscope. When it comes to the mixing process, think of it like an artist of illustration. Pencil in hand, they've sketched out the frame and detail of their creation. And now they're going to focus on shading. They'll contemplate incorporating our physical reality into the drawing by literally drawing upon the natural world. The position of the sun in relation to their character, where light ought to be bright and where darkness would be dim. This method enhances the overall visual perception of the illustration that gives it its characteristic realness. So far in Moonlight Sonata, we've recorded the framework and edited the performance to establish our sonic design. Next up, we take a look at the big picture. In the mixing stage, we become much more objective. Our goal is to fine-tune the shading of our recording. we're going to look at how audio tools like EQ, compression, delay, and reverb can play a useful or sometimes destructive role in shaping our sound. Until next time, I've been Jonathan. Keep creating.